So let's take a look at making an animated furniture item using the toolkit. So as always, we need to start from a clean scene. So File, New, General. This just resets everything. So we're starting from the basics. And then from View, we want Sidebar. Or use the shortcut key. Click. There's the sidebar. There's the toolkit panel. Click on that, and we want furniture tool for this. So click on the label, expand the options, and just click on create furniture to drop in the defaults. So click that, and the toolkit will drop in the basics, which is the root furniture node, which anchors to the furniture node that's in a room. And then we've got the basic mesh, which is set up to be the correct height for the avatar to sit on. So to make a furniture item, an animated furniture item, what we need to do is add an additional node that will be animated, because we can't animate the root node, because this is the thing that latches on to the furniture nodes in a room. So this generally needs to remain static. It shouldn't move or change. So what we want to do for that is select it, and then what we can do is in the object menu, just duplicate it. Duplicate object. So object, duplicate objects. This creates a duplicate, which removes the mouse. As is always, press escape to reset. And we can either leave that there, or we'll just move it using the move widget so that we can see it whilst we work on the project. This won't affect the animation in any way. So with that moved, what we can do next is rename it so that we know what we're working with. So in the outliner, double click the entry and just call this spinner. So this is going to be the node that we actually animate. So we don't move this, but we do move that. So that's step one. We just need to create the structure, the skeletal structure that we'll need for animation. Next, we need to prep the mesh. That is, link the mesh to the animated object. We don't want to animate the mesh itself. We want to animate the control that controls the mesh. So we need to do two things here. Select our mesh, edit mode, and then in object data properties, we want to create a vertex group. So click on the plus button. That drops in a group called group by default. Double click. And we want to name this, so this name needs to be the same as the name that's attributed to our control node, which is spinner. So double click type spinner, and it is case sensitive. Once we've done that, we need to assign this group to our mesh. So that's all the vertices of the mesh. So everything that this object controls needs to be associated with this vertex group, and we do that clicking the Assign button. So make sure everything is selected. Select all, and then click Assign. And we can test this with Select and Deselect. And it should select and deselect the mesh. That's all we need to do. Exit edit mode, back into object mode. Then the final step is to parent the mesh to the node that we're going to animate. Because we're using nodes, we can't do what we normally do, which is to use an armature modifier on the mesh. So we have to physically parent or link the two objects together. So for that, click the mesh, then shift click the animation node, and then from the object menu we want parent object. So that's object, parent, object. We'll get a little context pop-up. Open that and make sure the type is set to object and that keep transform is enabled. So click the checkbox. What this means now is that if we select the node on its own and just press the G key to activate move, we can see that our object, the mesh, moves with the control node. Just press escape to reset. So if we hadn't done this, so we can undo, undo, undo. So if we select the node on its own, press the G key, it doesn't control the mesh. So without that parenting, the mesh won't move with the node. So click, shift click, object, parent, object. Make sure our settings are set so that we now have that node controlling the mesh. What we then need to do is connect the node to the root. And so similarly, click the node, then shift click the root node, and again object, parent, object. And if we watch the relationship up here in the outliner, we'll see spinner disappear because it's associated then with attachment root. So click, shift click, object, parent, object. Again, make sure the type is set and keep transform is active. And we can see in the outliner that that node has disappeared as a child object of attachment.root. So if we now select attachment.root on its own, press the G key, everything moves with the root node, and this is what we want. So just press escape to reset. So what we've done is we've created a hierarchical structure. This is essentially our skeleton. So it goes from root to node to mesh. So let's save this. File, save as. Toolkit Animated Furniture 1. Save as. So that's step 1, setting the object up for animation. Step 2 is the animation itself. So what we want to do is animate the node, the control node. So select it and then swap the timeline for the dope sheet. So we're at the timeline at the moment. Dope sheet. And then we swap the dope sheet for the action editor. We can click drag on the border of the windows, so this dark line, just to expand that a little bit so that we can get a better view of what we're looking at. And this is the timeline that we're going to use to create our sequence. And all we're going to do is just a simple rotation animation. So we've got the timeline ready. All we need to do is insert our keyframes. So that is, we're going to pose, we're going to move the control node and then insert some keyframes. So select, we need to set our base frame. So object, animation, insert keyframe. We can use the I key for this because we'll do it quite frequently. So object, animation, insert keyframe. We'll get the insert keyframe menu pop up, and what we want from this is location and rotation. That's all we need. We don't use scale. So location, rotation, and we get a keyframe marker in the timeline. So that's frame 1. So grab the timeline scrubber, move it to frame 30, and let's rotate this. So we're switching to the rotate widget. We're just going to click drag the z-axis and rotate around that, holding control so we snap to the grid or increments, and rotate that by 90 degrees. So if we watch what's happening at the top there as we move, we can rotate by fixed amounts. Click, Object, Animation, Insert Keyframe. So once we've moved our object, we insert the keyframe. So we're going to use the shortcut key from now on. Insert keyframe, location of rotation. So if we scrub that back and forth, we have our sequence. Let's do it again. Click, insert, press the I key, location rotation, and again. I key, location rotation, and then once more so that we come back to the beginning again. Insert, location rotation. So what we have is that. So that's our basic animation. So if we play this, press the space bar, it'll play our animation. It'll go on to play the frames that we've set, so 250 by default. So what we can do is adjust that so that we get a better idea of what our animation looks like. So press the space bar just to stop the sequence. So what we want to do then is go into Output Properties. Click. And then what we have are some sequence properties. So we need to do two things here. The end frame is 250 at the moment, which is down here. So we want to set that to 120. So just click type 120, and we can see that the highlighted area shifted from 250 to 120. So if we press the space bar now, we'll get our sequence playing correctly so that it loops. Next, for IMVU, we want to make sure that we set the frame rate. At the moment it's 24, so this should be 30. So click on the list and select 30. So if we press the space bar again, that changes the speed of the sequence a little bit. So we're almost there. The final step, what we need to do is, if we play the sequence, if we watch what happens at these transitions, so the start and the end point. So if we watch what happens to the mesh as it comes round from the 90, so frame 90, as it comes round, rotates round, and then transitions from the end to the start, we'll see a slight slowdown and pause. So press the space bar. It slows down and it pauses because the interpolation, that is how the frames, the in-between frames are interpreted keyframe to keyframe, is a Bezier curve, which means as the sequence eases from end to end. What we want is a uniform rate of change, so that would mean that the distance between the frames is the same regardless as to whether it's in the middle or at the end transitioning to the beginning again. So for that, what we want, let's space bar, is going to the key menu, and we want interpolation mode. What we want is linear. So we can see what each of these does. So let's get that started. Key, interpolation, let's try constant. You can see what that does. It jumps to the frames, the keyframes. The default is Bezier, which gives us the pause as it transitions from start to finish or finish to start. And what we want is linear. And we can see now how the object transitions from end to start frame, how it loops. It loops cleanly without any pauses. So let's save this and then export, because that is our basic animation set up for our furniture item. So save as, number 2. So to export, we just use the export tools. All we need to do is make sure that we have the mesh node, root node selected. This just ensures that everything is exported correctly. Keep an eye on our skeletal structure, that it complies with the mesh exporter. So we need our skeleton inside furniture nodes, and we need any meshes inside the mesh collection. And then all we need to do is export. That creates the FBX, which we can now load in Studio. So in Studio, we need to create a new project derived from the empty furniture. So in the categories, we want rooms and furniture, furniture, and there's the empty. Click on that to select, and then derive at the bottom. This is our default or base scene. So we're going to import our FBX. So import button, FBX, import FBX. So browse to and find our file. Select, and just click open. We'll get a preview with the file's contents. Set up FBX. Don't need to do anything here. Next. It's brought in the default material. There's our sequence. View. That's what it's going to bring in. And then import. So there is our object. It's automatically assembled. What we need to do now, go into Component, Actions, create a new action, so click the plus button. Then on the right, we need to set our object up. So change the trigger to stance.idle, uppercase I, it's case sensitive. Action type, room, create our ensemble. In the asset, we should have our sequence. There it is, spinner, spinner, action. Set the frame range, 1 to 120. Number of loops, 0. Replace, everything else is okay. Click apply, and preview. And there is our animated furniture item. So let's just show the skeleton so that we can see what we're doing. So we can see the root node is static, doesn't move. But the control node does. And the control node is controlling the mesh, which moves with the control node. And that is the basics of setting up using IMVU Studio Toolkit to create a simple animated furniture item.